this year's special contributor to business publications and DSM magazine, and I want to welcome you to our Lifting the Veil series called Life Interrupted, which looks at the mental health effects of the pandemic and the multiple disruptions of 2020. We have a great program in store for you. Today, we are going to do two things. First, we are going to unveil DSM's annual stunning and important Lifting the Veil publication. And then we'll be focusing on the mental health challenges around diversity and equity and inclusivity. First, I want to share just a little bit about this series. DSM magazine has long been committed to the health and well-being of our community, and 4 years ago created a publication called Lifting the Veil to highlight the issue and reduce the stigma. Last year, we added an annual event, but when the pandemic hit, we quickly realized that there was definitely a need to shine a light on how this situation will have short-term and long-term impacts on our community. We expanded this event in this series, and this is our 9th event on mental health this year. Before we get started, I definitely want to make sure that we give out our many thanks. First of all, many thanks to the DSM team who has worked tirelessly to create this project and execute this project. We also want to give a major many thanks to Connie Weimer and the dedication that she had in starting this amazing organization. Now for our sponsors, I want to thank our sponsors who definitely made this program possible. The Lifting the Veil event sponsor, Make It Okay. Thank you for all your contributions and your dedication to this specific topic. Lifting the Veil Life Interrupted series presenting sponsor, Delta Dental of Iowa. We thank Delta Dental for their commitment to this. And then we also want to thank our supporting sponsors, Clyde Behavioral Health, Mercy One, our sustaining sponsors, Employee and Resources of Iowa, Make It Okay, also our series sponsor, Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center, and NCMEC. We are so gracious to have you all on board with this very, very important topic. Next, we're going to have a heartfelt thank you to our Life Interrupted presenting sponsor, Delta Dental of Iowa. Delta Dental of Iowa has been improving the health and smiles of Iowans for over 50 years. And I am pleased to introduce our Delta Dental representative today, Lynn Patterson, Manager of Government Relations at Delta Dental. Lynn, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much, Deidre. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Lynn Patterson. I'm the Government Relations Manager at Delta Dental. And for more than 50 years, Delta Dental has been improving the health and smile of Iowans. We provide vision and dental benefits to more than 1.2 million Iowans. And as a not-for-profit insurance company, we believe in giving back to our communities. Most recently, Delta Dental and its foundation committed more than $50 million to COVID-19 and derecho recovery and relief efforts. These funds were used to assist our dental providers, support our community health centers, and address food insecurity issues throughout Iowa. And as a health and wellness company, we understand the importance of emotional and physical well-being, especially during these trying times. This is why we're so excited to support the Lifting the Veil series and the important messages it brings. So we hope you enjoy the discussion today on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and thank you so much for joining us.
Next, we want to give a special moment for Make It Okay. Make It Okay was on board to be a sponsor for the regularly annual event before COVID hit. And then we created the Life Interrupted series. So from Make It Okay, I'd like to introduce Jamie Habrel, Executive Director of Make It Okay. Jamie, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. So as Deidre said, my name is Jamie Habrel. I serve as the Executive Director at the Iowa Healthy Estate Initiative, but also serve as a Tri-Chair for Capital Crossroads Wellness Capital. Make It Okay is a campaign led by the Iowa Healthy Estate Initiative, and we are thrilled to sponsor the Lifting the Veil. Make It Okay is a community campaign to start conversations and increase understanding about mental illness so that ultimately we can end the stigma. I invite you to join us by visiting the website makeitokay.org/Iowa, where you can take the pledge to make it okay. Sign up to get alerts about upcoming Make It Okay ambassador training opportunities. Register your workplace to become a Make It Okay site. Read stories of Iowans who are living with mental illness. Donate to our Giving Tuesday campaign and access resources to learn more about common conditions, how you can help someone in crisis, and how to have compassionate conversations about mental illness. Thank you to DSM Magazine for lifting the veil on this important topic and supporting the efforts to make it okay.
I experience anxiety every day. I have social anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety, I'm pretty sure. Probably depression too, but.
My first episode with depression occurred when I was 17.
I have struggled in the past with anorexia.
My 12-year-old son, Sam, has bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, and ADHD.
Mental health is normal. Everybody has mental health, right? Like, it's just a variety of degrees between wellness and illness.
Mental illness has a biological basis, that it has a physical basis in your brain.
We all have mental health. Some people are just unfortunately affected by an illness, and the brain is affected in a different way.
It's like wearing a coat in the sense that some days you really feel like it's really heavy, it's making you hot, it's uncomfortable, and then there are other days that it's not even there, like you don't even notice it.
In the beginning, the toughest part of my mental illness was just how much it took over my life.
We look at certain diseases like cancer and diabetes, and we think, oh, if you're bleeding, if you're physically hurt, you should go and get help. And unfortunately, we don't see mental health the same way.
It is okay to say, I have an illness. It's okay to get the help you need. And in fact, it's something you should and need to do for yourself.
If you're affected by mental illness, I want you to know that you're not broken, even though I know you feel like you are. And most importantly, you're not alone.
Together, we can make it okay.
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 Together we can make it okay.
Together, we can make it okay.
Wow, that was a powerful, powerful video. You've got folks from throughout our community that are helping us learn about these challenges that we see relating to mental health through their own lens. And I couldn't be more proud and fond of them allowing us to take a walk in their shoes. This year, Lifting the Veil has focused on life interrupted because honestly, our lives have been interrupted in a number of ways. And it has been incredibly challenging around the issue of mental health and the degrees of separation that we see as it relates to wellness and illness. And to talk about this important publication that DSM has put together is the editor-in-chief herself, Christine Richelli. Christine, how are you doing this morning?
Great, thank you. Thank you all who are attending this panel. As we all know, COVID-19 has deepened the mental health challenges of everyone, from our youngest to our oldest residents. This year's Lifting the Veil focuses on these pandemic-related challenges, as well as helpful tools, techniques, and tips to cope with and meet with these challenges. The story All By Ourselves, Luke, you wanna, yep. The story All By Ourselves explores how COVID has made the loneliness epidemic even worse. It was bad before COVID. It's even worse now, especially among our seniors. In this story, you'll also find ways to reduce loneliness. Next, Luke. The story College Through the COVID Lens takes a look at what is happening with our college students. On college campuses everywhere, students' uncertainty about their future, a lack of control, concerns about their physical health and safety has greatly affected their mental health. In short, the experiences students are having at college these days are nothing like all of us had. All their expectations are being quashed, and it's a really tough time for them. This story explores the impact of the pandemic on students and how they're managing the adversity. They are resilient. Next, Luke. Since we put this story together in early September, Code Blue for Caregivers, the issue has become even more relevant and more critical with this recent surge absolutely overwhelming healthcare providers and our healthcare facilities. We had no idea when we put this together that it would be even worse by the time the issue came out. In this story, we hear from providers about their experiences dealing with all of it, how they're dealing with it, and what they need, and also what their medical organizations are doing to help them through it. One doctor told us at the time that the public has absolutely no idea what they're going through, and I think that's been intensified even further with the recent developments. Other stories in the issue address the mental health effects of COVID on the LGBTQ youths, educators, K-12 students, and those with anxiety orders, including a compelling first-person narrative by Rachel Vogel-Quinn, sharing her experiences with anxiety. And there's also a story on practical ways that you can help. Thank you again for attending, and I will hand this back over to Deidre.
Thank you for walking us through what is an amazing publication, always amazing, but this year I think it really hits home. This specific one hits home to so many of us. To check out this issue, make sure you go to dsmmagazine.com, dive deep into it. It would be some excellent holiday reading next week. Thank you again, Christine, and to the BPC team for shining a light on mental health for this publication. We really appreciate you. Now to the discussion, the moment you've all been waiting for. This is our last conversation this year on Lifting the Veil, and today we'll be focusing on the mental health challenges around diversity, equity, and inclusivity. You're wondering, oh, do those things mesh up? Well, our panelists today will help you understand, yes, they do, and how they do. During the pandemic, conversations around equity have intensified, creating anxiety for those who are unsure how they become more aware or how they make changes in their lives, and certainly for those individuals who represent diverse populations and come from diverse populations, even creating anxiety around fear of developing positive relationships with people who may not look like you. Here's how the program's going to work. I'll introduce our expert guests today, and then I'll share an audience question. Once we hear that audience question, our experts will then answer those questions and discuss tools and techniques that you all as viewers can utilize and incorporate in the work that you do. Imagine yourselves taking a walk in someone's shoes today. We'll be taking several questions and repeating that exact same format. Now, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to address them. We have a very, very short window, but I will definitely try to get them to our panelists and to incorporate them into the conversation. First, our first expert is Reverend Eileen Gebbe. She is an ordained Christian priest in the United Church of Christ, currently serving a church in Ames. She has degrees in sociology and divinity. Her work has long emphasized structural racism. As a queer woman, her embodiment has been a challenge to homophobia and to sexism. We also have Rima McCoy-McDeed. She is the executive director of Central Iowa Center of Independent Living and is the treasurer of Anti-Racism and Equity Task Force and a co-chair for the National Council on Independent Living. After a 20-year career in social services, Rima shifted her vocation to simply serving marginalized people and addressing how systems create them. Last but not least, we have Dr. Richard Salas. He's a Ph.D. and the Chief Diversity Officer of Des Moines University. He is responsible for multicultural programming and provides training in the area of cultural competency and cultural humility across 3 colleges and can often be found in the classroom teaching himself. We are so grateful to have each and every one of you all here with us this afternoon. Are y'all ready for these questions? Yes, go ahead and unmute yourselves now, panelists. Our first question comes from Micah Keel. Let's hear from Micah.
Hi, my name is Micah Keel. I'm the Director of Philanthropy for Wells Fargo in the state of Iowa. Thanks for taking my question. Many of us in the workforce want to be more inclusive. Sometimes we're afraid that we might make a mistake, especially when working with somebody from a different background, a different culture, a different community than we come from. What advice can you give us to help us overcome that fear so that we can indeed be more inclusive every day? Thanks.
All right, so fear can be mentally paralyzing and really not be helpful in our progress towards creating inclusive environments. Dr. Salas, I'd really like to throw it to you first to answer this question. How do folks overcome this fear in order to move forward? Because it's real. It's real, right?
It sure is. First of all, thank you for including me on this panel. Great question, Micah and Deidre. Yes, we're going to make mistakes. My advice is that it is important to accept that we will make mistakes and learn from them, just as we do with everything else in life. I think in terms of strategy or advice to help people overcome this fear and move forward is concerned, it is important to find out who at your organization or workplace may be supportive of your efforts to be more inclusive. Then learn what their needs are, because they're gonna include a wide range of needs. And then work collectively to create a committee or group of coworkers that are willing to work with you, and then identify strategies, ways to address those needs. I guess my advice also includes try to meet people where they're at in terms of their own awareness or maybe lack of in the area of inclusiveness. So patience and having an open mind and understanding that working towards becoming more inclusive, it's an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Getty, sometimes it's less about making this mistake and more about how we deal with the mistake. Can you offer some advice to folks who may experience challenges and are unclear about, okay, I made the mistake, what can I do to remedy this situation?
I think the temptation for well-meaning white people is often to dwell in the mistake and feeling bad, which in my experience is part of what I call the creative force of the destruction of white supremacy, in that it will do anything it can to keep white people from engaging in change. Either it will hold us back through fear, even if we want to change, or keep us in guilt when what we really need to do is acknowledge, ooh, I blew that. I'm going to learn and I'm going to move on, because whatever fear or guilt I feel is nothing compared to the depression, fatigue, and exhaustion of living in a white supremacist world, a world in which the life chances for Black, Indigenous, and people of color are so limited. So pay attention to that fear and that guilt and realize that's part of white supremacy, trying to hijack your own emotions and your mental health in order to maintain the status quo.
All right, that was deep, Dr. Gabby. Rima? Any comments following that one?
Whew. Reverend Gabby did not come to play.
Oh, and I also gave you that doctoral title just now too, Reverend.
Well, she just earned it. I mean, come on, right? So first of all, I want to thank you, Deidre. I want to thank DSM for pulling this together. This is my second Lifting the Veil event this year, and so I'm just really honored to be back to close out the year. I want to thank Reverend Debbie for bringing the truth. But you know, there's a piece that we need to consider as we're having conversations about whenever humans are feeling fear. And the piece is implicit bias. And implicit bias has become certainly a buzzword in 2020, right? For lots of good reasons. But here's the deal. You know, implicit bias is something we all experience, okay? It's what helped our ancient ancestors to realize that perhaps running lest we be crushed underfoot by a wildebeest would probably be a prudent thing to do. And so it's been pivotal in the sustainability of human species. But fast forward to what's nearly 2021, there are no longer wildebeests roaming the earth. And so that mechanism that has sustained us for so long kind of acts in wacky ways here in the 21st century. And so what that means is if I'm a white woman and I'm standing in an elevator and a Black man steps on, you know, implicit bias kicks in and I start holding my purse a little closer to me than I had before. And I might not even realize that I'm doing that. I'm totally oblivious because implicit bias is what happens when our brain is on autopilot. The Black man is acutely aware of what has just transpired because his personal sustainability is contingent in this modern society on having a very close and good understanding of what's going on around him and how people are responding to him. And so when each of our demographics experience fear with regards to interacting with people that are different from us, we have to be cognizant of the fact that our fears are all coming from different places. And for some of us, that fear is, I'm afraid that I'm going to screw up. And that's a valid fear. For some of us, that fear is, I'm afraid that I'm going to get shot by police. And that is an incredibly valid fear. And so how do we get these groups, these seemingly disparate groups together, you know, is the question. And so going back to what Dr. Rich said, you know, meeting people where they're at, hugely important. But that really requires us all getting very competent with regards to the unique experiences of different demographics in our society. And then with that, meeting each other where we're at, bringing a lot of empathy to the table as well, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was key, Dr. Salas, just in, you know, really opening about meeting people where they are. I mean, that's a very intentional statement that goes a long way, don't you think?
Definitely. You know, at Des Moines University, this is my framework. So inclusivity is one of our main tenets, and equally as important, Dr. Franklin, our president, as well as our administration, they fully support DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. So it is part of who we are as an institution. I understand that some people may not have this level of support. So DEI requires strategy. It requires self-reflection. It certainly requires wearing the hat of educator and practicing humility and identifying actionable items. You know, taking small steps to become more inclusive is important. And then you build off of that work. Again, sometimes I know for me, I fall short sometimes, but it's important to understand that we all might make some mistakes along the way and not be fearful of moving forward. I like what Dr. Franklin reminds us of here. She says, prepare the soil before the seed. We can talk about white supremacy and privilege and fragility and all these are important issues and topics. But I believe that we have to prepare people's hearts and minds for them to be able to at least be open to hear that narrative, that counter narrative at times.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
What I hear you saying is that, you know, you have to be intentional about this, as intentional as you are as crafting budgets for your organization, you have to be as intentional about the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the organization. We're going to go to the next question from Connie Ryan, which I think will segue perfectly from this conversation.
Hi, I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. And our communities are becoming more diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, languages spoken, and certainly religion and religious practices. Many people are cautious about diversity, and some people value and embrace diversity. And so what would you suggest to help folks be more open to creating new and positive relationships with people from different faiths, especially when they might not be familiar with those traditions?
Reverend Gebby, we're going to flock to you first for this question. You know, we have a very diverse community here in the city of Des Moines. And the last statistic that I saw, it was about 65 to 70% of folks were Christian, and the other percentage, 30 to 35%, were a number of other things. And you know, that creates challenges as it relates to people who lack understanding about different faiths and different religions. What advice would you have so that we could, you know, help people forge some positive relationships with folks that may not be culturally or religiously affiliated with each other?
I think it's a terrific question. And one of the simplest things to do is, if you have an electronic calendar, let it automatically add all religious holidays to your calendar. So when you have two different Eids pop up, research them. When you see Diwali, research them. When you see the high holy days of Judaism, research them. The different paths to the divine are remarkable and beautiful. But at more surface level, interrogate what your religious tradition is teaching you about other religions, particularly in Christianity, with the way that we incorporated / colonized Judaism. We have a lot to consider there, what that has done to our relationship with people who are Jewish. It's been historically really destructive. And knowing that in a nation that still is in its founding and a lot of its cultural practices very Christian, recognize how exhausting that is for people who say are Muslim and have to defend their religion all the time, or people who are Sikh and are so constantly misunderstood for the beards and for the turban. Recognize where you're at, and then embrace opportunities to learn, because in my experience as a Christian, my faith and my experience of the divine is so much more enriched by seeing the breadth and depth of human expression. And I can walk my faith path without discrediting anyone's choice not to have faith.
Dr. Salas, you were just kind of broaching on this topic in the last question about creating inclusive communities. I'm sure that happens at DMU, and I'd love for you to share with folks some of the tools and techniques you've utilized just on this issue alone.
Sure. You know, I want to go back to a really important point that Rima made earlier. I think it's important to think about and learn where our own level of comfort or discomfort comes from. I need to be first aware of my personal biases, perceptions, those stereotypes that may be different of different faiths and spirituality. You know, oftentimes our preconceived notions of someone from a different faith prevents us as human beings from learning about each other. And so we have been taught through our upbringing that difference sometimes in terms of faith is negative. It's those people over there, they do it this way. And I've learned to, in our programming here, to be as inclusive as possible, working with the Muslim Student Association, working with the Christian Student Association, bringing in community members so we can learn in the context of healthcare. Are there foods? Are there certain times of the year that potentially they can't eat certain kinds of foods or have dietary restrictions, rather than label it, oh, they don't want to cooperate, right? Well, it's part of their faith and tradition. And we have to open up our minds, because these preconceived notions are so negatively ingrained in our way of thinking And unless we're willing to unpack that and just have an open mind, and because someone prays or worships different than me, doesn't make them any better or worse. They're human beings. They have the right to do that. So through programs, through trainings, through speakers, we try to do that here at Des Moines University in a respectful way, making sure that all different faith perspectives matter, and we can find value in that.
You know, Remus, some would say that the approach that Dr. Salas has in considering other folks is too much work. It one takes me outside of my comfort zone, and it also adds a lot of other things. I mean, even speaking about the menus in the cafeteria and the dining halls that they may have. Oh, I've got to change up all of this stuff just for, you know, a few students. Can you speak to how important that taking those extra steps might mean for that student, or does it even matter at all?
Well, I think that, and I want to throw in a little bit of mental health flavor into my response as well, because the fact of the matter is that for folks who identify as a person of faith, whatever that faith is, one of the reasons why that identity is important to them is because in some respect they experience refuge in that faith, you know, be it spiritual, emotional, mental. You know, many people that I encounter, that I have worked with, have experienced transformation as a result of identifying with a faith, and so that's powerful stuff. And I remind folks of that when they balk at the idea of respecting somebody's faith that's different from theirs. I remind them, your relationship to your faith has been transformational for you, is important for you. You know, more than likely your peer who is of a different faith has that same dynamic with their faith as well. And so they deserve to have that respected as a result. You know, I'm going to keep coming back to empathy today, because the thing is that, you know, as the conversations have been breached in 2020, many of them feeling very unprecedented to many of us, given context and people participating in them, there's a bell that has rung and it can't be unrung. And so now we have to continue having conversation about empathy, you know, because you can't have inclusion without empathy. But the thing is that when you entertain conversations about empathy, there's a point that you reach where you realize, oh, this society that we live in has a default setting, and that default setting is white, middle class, Christian, male, female binary, heterosexual presenting, et cetera, et cetera. And for that reason, the closer I align with that default setting, the more society has catered to me. And so it hasn't felt like anybody's had to go out of their way and to make sure that I have food on a school cafeteria menu that I can eat. That day is passing away in this country. And we are now really, truly making room for everybody else. And we need to do this with empathy and respect the fact that everybody deserves just as much investment in time and care and accommodation as everybody else does ultimately.
You know, I'm reminded of my own faith. I'm a Christian, and one of the things that the Bible teaches us is not to be a stumbling block in our brother's path or our sister's path. And that's something that I always try to lead with. Don't get in anybody's way of being who they are. Just let them be. Let them be. Let's go on to the next question from Shekinah Young.
Can you share any tips or tricks on how to create good relationships when you may often be asked to be the spokesperson for your race?
So when Shekinah's question, she asked about essentially how do you create good relationships with folks when you're being the spokesperson. And I think that this is kind of undergirded by, we have people who represent diverse populations, and our community is definitely wrapping their arms around them, and it puts them in a challenging scenario. And this could be intersected with race, this could be intersected with gender, it could be intersected with religion. But how do you still have those relationships, genuine relationships with people, when you're asked to be the spokesperson? And sometimes you may always feel like you're on. We'll start with Rima on this one.
Yeah, this is, I thank you, Shekinah, for asking this question. It's an amazing question. And I want to reiterate something that I said previously about the default setting for our society. It's white, middle class, male, female binary, straight, heterosexual presenting, Christian, so on and so forth. So the further removed a person is from that default setting, the more vulnerable we are to being in situations where we potentially can be tokenized and sought out for our guidance with regards to a population that we're a part of. And that's very deeply frustrating. It can also be very traumatizing, though, and that's something we don't talk about enough. The racial trauma of being a racially marginalized person in this country, particularly a state like Iowa, where people are constantly reminding us only 3.4% of people in Iowa are Black people, and experiencing the tokenization that invariably comes as a result of that. And so there's a responsibility that we all bear, those of us who are racially marginalized or members of the queer community or removed from that default setting that I alluded to earlier in a considerable capacity. Whether we like it or not, we are constantly in a position where we are offering teachable moments to folks, and that's very exhausting. And can be very frustrating at times. And so, but we also need to remember, and I think this is the crux of my response, we need to make sure that we are cared for and attended to, as we are constantly being bombarded and asked to be the representative and that kind of thing. We can say no respectfully. We can, gratefully decline the request to join the board of directors and be that tokenizing presence. And we can also figure out ways to articulate the why behind the decline, because again, that's a teachable moment. And making clear to folks that our intent is to ensure that they grow as citizens of the world and have a grow in their understanding of people that are different from them. And that can't happen if you're constantly tokenizing people that are different from you. And so I know that's hard, that it can feel hard to do, saying no can feel very difficult, but it can also be a powerful learning experience for people.
You've used the word token a lot in there, and I don't want to stray too far away from this question, but I do want to help people understand who may be listening to say, I want to bring so-and-so onto the board. I want to invite this person to be a part of this experience, but I don't want to treat the individual like a token. Dr. Salas, I'm going to throw this curveball at you real quick. How do you err on the side of helping people understand what's a token, what's not, how they treat people like an individual and a human being rather than a token? How do people discern the difference between those two things?
That's a great question, Deidre. I guess for me, the first thing I would say, because I have been asked to be on boards or different committees to be the token. And the first thing I say, make it clear, is that I cannot speak for an entire race, or in my case, an ethnic group. I can't speak for 60 million Latinos. So the role of educator comes in to this process and making sure that people understand not just what tokenism is, but the difference between a generalization and a stereotype. okay? And there's a big difference. So for example, someone recently asked me, hey, Rich, if Latinos, do you think all Latinos are supportive of building a wall? Or do you think that they're in support, the Latinx community is supportive of immigration reform? And it's like, I took a deep breath and I said, you know, rather than try to speak for all the Latinx community, I make sure that the response that I provide my audience or that individual is my personal take on it. I mean, we can look at data, we can look at statistics, and that's important to do that, to support our, but I also want to make sure that there's going to be a wide range of responses from different people of the Latinx community and all these different identities, whether it's your political affiliation, your document status, your educational level, all these different things that make us who we are as intersectional individuals. I think it's important to make sure that we educate people. That can become exhausting, and then we do feel like a token. So it's an ongoing process of educating people, and sometimes taking a deep breath and saying, you know, I don't think this is probably a good fit for me. If you see if that's what that organization or board or committee wants you to fulfill, and just have an honest conversation and be straightforward with that. But I would just recommend people to do what I do. I can't speak for 60 million people.
And no one should expect you to. No one should expect
you to. Right, right.
Yeah. Reverend Gebby, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I can't answer it so much as speak to how pervasive it is. In my context, I'm often put in the position of representing the gays, which I think is really absurd as a white lady. We are among the biggest problems within the queer community and larger America in terms of our benefit from white supremacy. I cannot represent a trans woman of color, like my nibbling. I cannot represent her. But that's how powerful those norms that Rima named are. They are so powerful that even I can become a token. And so when I was thinking about this question, I kept coming back to Shekinah's name, which is in biblical Hebrew, Shekinah,
Lord,
which is the indwelling of God. This is God. This is the place where God is. So if God is in all people, all people must be received as they are, as sacred, just as they are and just as they were born. And I try to insist that people do that with me and my individuality and attempt to receive other people that way. People just as they are, and the voices that they bring are the dwelling of holiness.
I just saw a comment from Shekinah. She was soothed by the fact that you knew the meaning of her name. All right.
It's one of the best words ever.
All right, let's go on to the next question. We are going to hear from Max.
Hi y'all, my name is Max and my pronouns are he and they. My question today is, mobile mental health services, community support, and education are all important parts of the conversation on the intersection of race and mental health. Yet many of our folks on the front line of mental health crises are police officers instead of trained mental health professionals. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between policing, police policy, and mental health, especially as it relates to marginalized communities? Thank you.
So this is a question that I have heard a great deal on, especially over the last 9 months or so. And, you know, when you talk to law enforcement, their mindset is that we are not mental health professionals, but we are placed in positions to be so, and we can only do what we've been trained to do. And then you hear from the mental health professionals, how do we better connect with these departments so that we can do the work and add some value to the situation? I mean, it's a tough one. And, you know, but it's not a catch-22 topic. There is a solution to this. And Rima, I want to go to you first, because I know you spent some time talking about these topics and dealing with these challenges. Help us understand, how do we bridge these gaps?
So we learned at the beginning of the hour that 1 in 5 people in the US experience mental illness at some point in their lives. That's 20% of the population. That said, mental illness is a deeply mystifying experience by and large in our country. It's a deeply stigmatized experience. And that, however, mental health services and supports have evolved significantly in the past 100 years or so. However, there's a default setting as far as the provision of services and supports with regards to mental health, mental illness. And that default setting is white people. And so what I'm getting at is that the mental health experience or mental illness experience for Black, Indigenous people of color is completely misunderstood in our society. As a result, a disproportionate number of brown and Black children are misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, overdiagnosed, or even just outright undiagnosed at the same time that their white peers with mental illness or other disabilities are being diagnosed. And so, at the beginning of a young person's life, they are being misunderstood. And so as a result, that facilitates their placement on the preschool to prison pipeline, because their behaviors, quote unquote, which could be a sign of a mental illness or a behavior disorder or another disability, are being misunderstood or pathologized, and that child is experiencing consequences for their behavior. And this goes on and on through the life of racially marginalized people who experience mental illness or other disabilities. According to the Department of Justice, 40% of people who are or have been incarcerated experience a disability, including mental illness. And we all know that a disproportionate number of racially marginalized people experience incarceration. Again, the population of Black folks in Iowa is 3.4%, but the prison population of Black folks is nearly 30%. We're consistently in the top 3 states in the country that incarcerates more Black people per capita. And so if you put those two statistics together, that tells you that law enforcement, the judicial system, has become a de facto provider of services and supports to brown and Black folks that experience mental illness. And then, of course, this also leads to the tragic outcome of individuals who are brown or Black being killed by police officers. For every 1 white man that is killed by a police officer, 2.5 Black men out of 1,000 are killed by a police officer. 50%, between 30 and 50% of people who are killed by police experience a disability, typically a non-apparent disability like a mental illness. And so this is a huge issue. It's a bigger issue than I think we think that it is. And it touches on a lot of aspects of society that we need to talk about. And so, my guidance to folks is get a baseline understanding of what's really going on first and foremost. If you want to tackle the issue of interface between law enforcement and racially marginalized people who experience mental illness, develop a baseline understanding of what's really going on, beginning with young brown and Black children. Because the other thing is this, and I'm sorry, I know I'm going a little over, but I'm very passionate about this. With the pathologization of brown and Black children who experience mental illness is also the pathologization of brown and Black children. The studies show that we perceive brown and Black children in particular, as being older than they actually are. And so that causes our frame of reference when we are viewing Black children in comparison to white ones to be a lot less empathic, certainly. And we're a lot less generous with regards to allowing for boys to be boys or kids to be kids when those kids are brown or black, and that also plays into all of this. And so, you know, ultimately this is a rabbit hole, certainly, but it's a rabbit hole that all of us need to dive into, because this is very much one of the biggest ills of our society currently.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Salas, the president of your organization, DMU, I mean, she is trained in the space of mental health with her doctoral degree. And I know that you all are training folks every day to go into this realm. And, you know, are you training anybody any differently than you were 10 years ago? I mean, what's your frame of reference as an educator in this space?
I think it's great work that Dr. Lisa Streffeler and Dr. Van Loo and others in behavioral medicine, along with the support of our president, Dr. Franklin. And it's important that we do prepare healthcare providers with this aspect that's been missing from historically from a medical health science institution. So we have a program in collaboration with NAMI and have students, some faculty and staff go through this training, and then we're building on that. I think it's really important. But I did want to make a point that I think that Rima I agree 100% with what she said. There was a study in 2018 that found that stories of police killings have adverse effects on mental health among Black American adults who were not directly affected by the incident. And then there was another study in 2019 that found that viewing viral videos of police killings, beatings, and arrests, and seeing images of children in cages was associated with symptoms of depression and PTSD. So, I mean, this is crazy. It makes these kids or adults feel worse about their racial identity.
Yes.
And makes them internalize some of this dehumanization that's taken place. So, I mean, this is a deep question and topic. We could probably go on for a week on this, but I'm going to go ahead and reserve some time for Reverend Gabby to chime in on this question as well.
Of course. Reverend Gabby?
Iowa is a complete failure when it comes to mental health services. Even when we managed to get legislation passed as an organization I work with, AMOS, a Mid-Iowa Organizing Strategy, did to develop funding streams for mental health services, it is not funded. Our own government will make a promise and then fail to follow through. But having said that, I, as a white person, when my depression kicked in this summer, had no problem accessing the healthcare I need because I have a job, I have health insurance, and I can find mental health providers who look like me. And even if they're not queer, they're willing to work with me. That is a level of privilege and care that so many people in our community do not have. So we have to pay attention to funding, I think. What's actually getting funded? The militarization of our police, growing our police services, or the mental health services that have been promised and then left hanging without any funding or any follow through.
Mm-hmm. You know, I appreciate that. And one of the things I wanted to lift up are the stats that Dr. Salas shared. And if you wouldn't mind sharing that information with me, because one of the things that we know from the organization called Iowa, oh my goodness, I can't remember it's ICCC, essentially for Iowa Collective Climate Change. Luana Nelson Brown runs that organization, and she tells us about a statistic as it relates to victim services. And less than 5% of the state's dollars go towards African Americans that were impacted by a crime that they may have witnessed or a crime that they may have been involved in. And that's a telling statistic, as well as, you know, how are we treating those victims that are experiencing trauma from a number of angles. Well, I definitely appreciate all of the time and all of the expertise that you all have shared with us today. This is an extensive topic. And of course, as Dr. Salas said, we could have talked about this all day. But we just had a smidgen of conversations, and each and every one of these people are accessible to you all. If you want to further the conversation, I know them all, and I'm pretty sure they won't say no to having a conversation with you. I'll have a closing thought in just a minute, but before that, I want to invite you to sign up for our free newsletters, DSM Weekly, Weekend in Wealth, and our IA statewide newsletter. You see there, you can go to dsmmagazine.com or iapublication.com to get linked up with those entities. Also find any of these things on Facebook as well. We'd love for you to subscribe to these print publications. When you are a subscriber, you get the print magazines, the digital newsletters, plus special publications like this Lifting the Veil one that we just showed you today, and invitations to events like these. To get a copy of this year's publication, go to dsmmagazine.com and you will get plugged. These are excellent ways to just stay connected with the information that DSM is offering on a regular basis. So I invite you to be a part of that. If we've learned anything today from our experts, it is clear that we are all learning together. It is clear that mistakes are inevitable, but during this time, it's less about the mistakes and more about how we deal with the mistakes and how we deal with each other. In order for us to move forward, and as this veil has been lifted for everyone, not just white individuals, but people of color, the intersection of race, of gender identity is fluid throughout these conversations. But as long as we take an opportunity to take a walk in someone's shoes, it is only until then that we will truly understand how we can move forward together. It is no longer enough for us to know ourselves and our family alone. We have to know each other as a community. This is a community that thrives on being stronger, being better, being greater together. We have the capacity, we have the capability, but it's time for us to equip ourselves with the knowledge by getting to know one another. Thank you so much for taking time to be a part of this discussion. We want to thank our sponsors again, Delta Dental, presenting sponsor, Make It Okay, Lifting the Veil in General, that sponsor. We also want to thank Clyde Behavioral Health, Mercy One for being a supporting sponsor, and to our sustaining sponsors, Employee and Family Resources of Iowa, Make It Okay, Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center, and NCMEC. Thank you to everyone who has made this possible. Continue to stay in tune with this organization and all the work that we're doing. Until next year for the next round of the Lifting the Veil series. Y'all take care.